Back in Needham, a couple weeks ago we were here and we were setting plates for the floor system, and now we are on to framing walls. One of the first walls that went up was this 26-foot wall here, Mike for scale, right? Yeah. Mike's 8 feet tall.
Of course.
But
you got some stilts?
This is, Mike, what room is this?
So we're in one of the offices on the first floor.
Two, we have one over here and one here.
Yes.
This right here, the husband had a few requests, two to be specific. We're gonna save one of them for a future episode.
Yeah.
But this is a will be a wood burning fireplace, right?
It is, yep. It's an insert that will slide right into that opening. You can vent it right up and out. We're gonna have brick on the outside so it still has that feel, you know, an authentic, you know, fireplace with the chimney.
But this is just, I mean, this is an epic office. You have, like I said, 26 foot to the ridge here.
26, 3 and 5/8. Dimitri just confirmed.
So Dimitri from Shevcon is actually framing this project. He is doing a fantastic job working alongside you. You guys are running through every single detail and really diligent about it. And one thing that we were talking about right before off camera, that is actually not going to be our ceiling height. Our ceiling height is going to be dropped down a little bit.
Yes.
Walk me through what your plan is with that.
We're essentially framing trusses on site. So you have the pitch of your roof, which is a 17 and 12, very steep. But then on the inside of that, framed down a little bit, we have a sloped ceiling joist that will be installed that will help tie it together, kind of creating a scissor, locking this in, preventing anything from, you know, bowing out over time. Yeah. And that will be at an 8 and 12 pitch. So,
8-12.
Yeah.
So on the inside, we'll still actually have a pretty high ceiling height.
Yeah, it's going to be right up above where the header is of that window, is where that ceiling joist is going to tie in. But then it's just at a much lower pitch than what you see on the exterior of the house.
Which makes sense because the floor plate, I mean, it's a definitely a nice size office. Yeah. But with that high of a ceiling can honestly feel almost overwhelming or just a poor use of space. Dropping it down the way Teak had designed it is going to make it feel a little bit more cozy, especially sitting around a wood burning fireplace here.
Yes, with some large windows as well. Yeah.
Well, speaking of large, and the structure in this thing is pretty wild. We have double stud here. I caught over here, we have straps. I think you were saying that these are 14 gauge?
Yeah. So
which is not typical.
Usually you see a 16 gauge strap. So this is a little bit heavier metal. Yep. And it's to transfer the force around our window openings. So you'll see around the exterior of the house, you're going to see one running above all the windows, and then there'll also be one below all the windows.
So this strap goes continuous. And, I mean, there's 1,000 nails in this thing, which I think you got one of these positive placement guns here, which basically you have this little tip here, which finds that hole, and that way you're not hammering these in by hand. I'm sure you, because I know I had when I was younger, hammered all of these in by hand. Not this size strap, but similar scenario.
Hangers and all the other.
So obviously we're going into a header here. Yep. But what about in this area as well?
So that's a double stud wall as well.
Okay.
So doubled up 2x6s, just like you see on, you know, the front gable. Same thing.
And what I'm seeing over there is I have blocking basically flipped up on the vertical with 1,000 nails sticking out of it.
Yeah, so that's on the back side of the strap. We have blocking in between each stud bay, and then that strap gets nailed in to lock everything in place.
So the reality is this is what is allowing us to put really expansive openings in these walls and helping prevent any issues with shear. And then you also have these massive anchors. Why don't we go over to this one here? These are called HDUs.
Yes.
And these are tied down into the foundation. I feel like, are those larger?
So right now you're only seeing the HDU 8s. Okay. We also have HDU 11 and HDU 14s.
So there's also these are the smallest.
There's 5s and 2s as well.
On this job?
So you're looking at the middle.
Okay, so we're looking at the middle. These are anchored into our quadrupled up stud here. Yes. And then this is piece of all thread, and that, my understanding, goes down into
the foundation. So that threaded rod for these HDU 8s is a 7/8 threaded rod embedded, I believe it's about like 20 inches into the concrete. And so that gets an epoxy to anchor it into that foundation.
Gotcha. Talk to me about the headers, because this wasn't the original plan, I don't believe, as far as having that insulated header. Was it? You looked at me like it was. I thought it wasn't.
No. It's just So the structural engineer called out what we need to use for our material for our headers. So we got tripled up 2x10s. That gave us 1 inch where we could sneak in a little bit of insulation.
Which typically you would see 2 layers of
Plywood.
half-inch plywood.
Yeah.
And here you have that 1 inch foam, which is giving you that thermal break from any cold transfer from the outside into this inside face here.
Yep.
Going backwards, the floor system. So last time we were here, we were setting plates and we were talking about the discrepancies. We had some bigger discrepancies than we expected, primarily due to the complexity of the wall.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of jogs. The concrete guy was, Mike was great. He understood what was going on. He was like, let's work together to fix it. We worked with Dimitri. It took him a little bit extra time, but it was really important to get that plate dead flat.
Yeah.
And from there, talk to me about the floor system, what we have going on, what we're standing on here.
Yeah, so like you're saying, start out dead flat. A little bit of time making sure that we start at 0. And then on top of that, we put in our load-bearing walls down the basement. That allowed us to drop in our I-joists. Mm-hmm. So we have 11 7/8 I-joists used everywhere, but there's different grades of those. So depending on how far they're spanning, there's different size, and there's just the top chord of that I-joist gets thicker depending on how much weight it needs to hold.
Why don't we go down there and take a look? I bet it's cooler anyway. The biggest thing, as we're talking about the structural design of this home, there's a lot that had to be considered. We have big roofs, we have a lot of load transfer, and we had to work really closely with the guys over at Hazel O'Neill, the girls over at Hazel O'Neill, to make sure that we were following those load paths correctly when we shifted the roof. The roof's pretty complex. We have swooping roofs, and it's not an easy detail to accomplish, but it all does start down here in what is the basement. So real quick, we have a double 2x6 wall. That's on top of that haunch slab, right?
Yes.
What's the reasoning for that?
So the double wall, it allows us to break our joists and divide that span up, keeping it smaller. A lot of houses, when you get this large, you see structural steel in here. We're actually doing this house entirely with no structural steel. So the doubled up walls, being able to transfer these load down, and then each span is divided up in somewhere around like 20 or so feet. So it's not a big span. And so depending on where we are in the house, you're gonna have different size joists. And so like you were saying, really had to pay attention to make sure we got in the right spot. If we used a lesser load rating joist in the wrong spot, you could get bouncing or,
Bounce is a huge issue. Like I think a lot of homes, that's something that isn't considered a lot. So we're not only combating bounce, you talked about TJI 230s, 560s, and 380s?
230, 360, 560.
It was close.
Close.
It was very close.
Not 380,
Not
360.
360.
Yeah.
So walk me through what the difference is between those.
Yeah, so it's the thickness of that bottom cord and just, what it can hold as far as its bearing capacity. So on the bottom cord, you can see it's all printed out. So it's very easy to see when you're picking through these stacks and grabbing the right ones. So here we have the TJI 230s. But then as we get over, if we walk over into like our living room area, which is a little bit larger of a span, you can see this bottom chord of this joist is much wider than the 230s.
So the 560, so the larger the number, the more bearing capacity that they have.
Yeah, it can go a longer span. So we're able to achieve it with all the same size joists, so all 11 7/8, so we don't have to worry about steps and ceilings or anything, but just using a few different
That's a great tip there, because I feel like I know we both walked homes where it's like you go in the basement, it's all cut up, ceilings are all over the place. And thinking about that of like, this is going to eventually be a finished space. And rather than having these, number one, odd soffits, we're not dealing with beam drops, we're not dealing with ceiling height.
You do have a beam drop, but strategically placed.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so this is actually placed in line with one of the walls. And so it's the back side of the hallway upstairs. So this would be the back side of our living room.
Is this the final condition right here? As for this beam? Because it's so interesting.
Yeah.
I'm seeing this for the first time. I haven't been down here since this beam.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see, if you follow it, this is your staircase coming down from your front entryway.
Yep.
You got a triple up, you got a quadruple there, a triple on the other side of the stair, and then you come over, and then this triple actually hangs off a header, which seemed to be sitting on top of this wall.
it is.
And we don't actually have a post.
And so, well, that doorway also gets closed down too. So like that corner that looks like it's going to be in a doorway, you actually don't see.
Right.
So what we did is the header for this door, we pushed it up over into the frame.
So that's what that header is up there.
Yeah.
So originally detailed it was lower.
Yeah.
And these probably were going to bear on top, but we swapped it to make sure that we didn't have to have a lower than average door.
Yeah.
So this is really where your role comes in on the site, and for us, our process on having a site super dedicated on the site is to work through these details, because it was something that had to be figured out on, kind of in the moment.
Yeah.
Or at least be considered, so we're not coming to the end result. We're always considering the end result. This could have very well been a shorter door, and while that might not seem like a big deal, when it's the shortest door in an otherwise big space,
yeah,
it's one of those things that it's like, nah.
All the other doors are 7.5 or 8 feet tall. Why is that one at whatever?
Right. So working with obviously the great team upstairs at Shevcon.
Yes.
He's also coming to the table with a lot of these questions.
1,000%.
Sure.
He's always bringing everything, and he asks a lot of questions and a lot of the right questions too. So.
Yeah. So lastly, for the floor system, we're talking about all these I-joists, talking about these beams. For stiffness, what was the other thing that is becoming a standard for us?
Big subfloor.
Big subfloor.
Yeah.
I think it's 125 pounds a sheet, if I remember right.
It's around there, yeah.
Yeah, it's over 100.
It's a lot.
So 1.1 inch Advantech.
Yep.
And that stuff's heavy. And one of the things that we've talked about in previous videos is the luxury floor rating, and essentially going back to what you said about sponginess and bounce, like something that when you walk a home, it's not something that people are going to be advertising, like, oh, check out how non-bouncy the floor is.
Right.
But when you live in a home and you're standing and you feel that floor bounce, it just doesn't feel good. And to walk across a floor that's nice and stiff, it's something that it just feels luxurious, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those things too that like you could walk through 100 different homes, and if you're not thinking about it, you could easily overlook it until you're living in a space and you're like, hey, that kind of feels weird. And so being able to get that and eliminate that essentially it's going to be huge. Yeah.
Great. I mean, awesome progress here. It looks like they're going to be standing up that back gable on the primary suite, which is awesome. You talked about those trusses you're going to be building on the rest of that platform.
Yeah, we're actually going to hold off on framing. A lot of times you come in, you slam out all the first floor walls, and then you go in the second floor and you start doing the roof. We're thinking about the entire build, and we're going to section off certain areas and address them while we have this large, working platform. Try to pre-build a lot of that stuff and then use the lull or a crane, whatever, and fly this stuff into place. So then the guys aren't working 20, 30 feet up in the air. Try to make it a little bit safer for them, and then efficiency will hopefully go up because then you're working at like a normal working condition, not off a staging, not out of a basket with a harness on and all this other stuff. So try to dissect it into little sections, and then the whole house is going to kind of come up together.
And again, it's really about being intentional with our decision making. The last thing I wanted to mention, what's up with the green spray paint on this framing here?
So they go through and they'll take, we have lifts, right, being dropped. They crown everything and they paint the side that the crown's on.
So that way they know, if you guys don't know.
Sorry, they paint the opposite side. So green means it's good, go to the inside. They push another crown on the outside.
Okay, so if you guys don't know if they don't know what a crowned stud is, what does it mean?
So if you sight up the edge of the stud, they will generally have a little bow to it. And so we want to just make sure that they're all going in the same direction and you're not flip-flopping them back and forth, because then you could end up with a pretty big discrepancy between two different studs. Right,
so if they're all kind of bowing in, at least they're going in the same direction. And then when we are in kind of that final framing punch, there's a good opportunity for us to go around and we can actually fix a lot of the crown stud if we find that it's necessary.
Yep.
Cool. Mike, appreciate it. The framing progress here is great. It's going to be interesting to see how you guys utilize the whole deck and do a lot of that prefabrication like you're talking about, and just being really intentional. And I know we didn't talk about it, but we'll talk about it in the next episode. But Mike's also working with Siga and making sure that our air sealing details are nailed down. This home won't be passive certified, but we are taking a lot of the same detailing that we've learned, say, in our Rhode Island build and bringing it here, because at the end of the day, despite not being passive certified or even at the passive level construction, we do want to build a really tight home so we can mechanically ventilate it correctly. And that's something that we'll share in a future episode. Stay tuned for that. See you guys next week.